and it was not an accidental drowning.
Right.
We know he was assassinated. And in fact, the colonel actually came to a friend of mine, Sherry Adamak, who got cancer and died rather quickly, who had helped me many years in the early days of this project. And he looked at me, and we both were just distraught over the death of our friends. And he said, "Well, we can't look back, and we've both had terrible losses, but we just have to move forward and put one step in front of the other." But he acknowledged that this had gotten Bill Colby killed because they had, they will eat their own. And so the hardliners within this so-called Majestic-Group are rather vicious, and they have at their disposal fearsome technologies, and they have been willing to use them. So I think that, it's a dynamic situation. More and more people in these classified projects. I recently had a meeting with a man at the CIA who is he's a scientist, a PhD, who is in charge of what is rather hilariously called WSFM. It stands for Weird Science and Frickin' Magic. That is what it's called. Within the classified world, these sort of really amazing electromagnetic sciences.
Right.
And these people are very supportive of this information coming out, and they're working behind the scenes to try to make change happen. But ultimately, you have to look at who, when you look at the multi-hundred trillion dollar commodities markets in oil and gas and commodities tradings and so-called derivatives, futures markets on these commodities and the electric utilities and all of that, our entire global economy and the machine that runs industrial societies is based on fossil fuel and the burning of stuff. Even a nuclear power plant, all it's doing is creating heat from splitting the atom to heat up water to turn a turbine like an old steam engine did in the 1800s.
A boiler.
Nothing really. Yeah. It's a boiler. Yeah. That's all it is. It's just a great big boiler run by the heat of fission. Yeah. So there's nothing advanced about any of it. And so these advanced concepts in physics, which have been suppressed, and of science and technology that have been suppressed for 50 to 100 years, these are the things that would completely change the world order. And the world order is this increasingly centralized macroeconomic beast, frankly, that's destroying the planet and enslaving the world, but has such enormous power that the President of the United States at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, as Bill Clinton called it, he says, well, the White House is the crown jewel of the federal penitentiary system. And that's what Bill Clinton said about the White House. And so, people have these wrong ideas about power and where it really resides. Now, I'm not to say that the president doesn't have any power at all, or that the Congress, but to exercise the power they do have, they're going to have to come together with Sarkozy and Merkel and the UN Secretary General and the Pope and a whole bunch of other people, and have the moral courage to do the right thing for humanity. And it's the moral courage that's now lacking. There's no lacking in actionable intelligence, because I left my medical career and have spent now 20 years, but full time, 10 years, putting together this positive evidence and proof. And I think actionable intelligence, and provided it to these sort of people. But I'm not the president, and I'm not a member of Congress or Parliament or what have you. And the question is, will these people do anything about it? And I think for that, the power rests more with the people, and the people realize the people are going to have to, A, get educated on the subject, and B, demand real change.
Right. And because it is an interesting situation right now as well. This system that you're describing as well seems to be, cracking a bit at the edges. It's kind of choking itself. Oil is going up, albeit that's artificially created, I think. But that's a side note. And the bank system is kind of on the brink of, falling apart in its own way as well. And everybody else is waiting for everybody else to come out with their, free energy devices or stepping forward, publicly talking about, these things. Okay, we have the Disclosure Project, obviously, but these people, but again, there's quite a few people who are not willing to step out with their name, so to speak, and talk about this as well. So the question is, what needs to be happen here? Do we need to come into such a bad state, a bad situation on the planet before actually this just flushes through, so to speak, or what needs to give here, so to speak? What do you think, Steven?
Well, I think people have to take matters into their own hands. For example, we have trained a couple of thousand people to be what we call ambassadors to the universe and learn to make contact. And actually, even though this gets ridiculed a great deal, even in the UFO subculture, the reason the CIA director approached this, and the reason a lot, is because they know that we succeeded in deciphering the Rosetta Stone of interstellar communication. It has to do with transdimensional issues, consciousness, non-local mind, remote viewing, all kinds of advanced concepts. And the reason the former head of Army Intelligence came to me and said, basically, what in the hell do you think you're doing? After we started doing this and having significant contact back in the early 90s, is that he knew that this was how something could happen on the grassroots that they can't control. They can't control thousands of people going out and making contact once they understand the concepts. And that's what we're going to be teaching at these workshops that we're doing in the United Kingdom and in France this summer. And I haven't been over there in 10 years, so it hasn't been so busy, but we're going to be, this is my only trip to Europe to do a training like this in 10 years, and we're going to be in France. And it's a very interesting. By the way, we have a 2,000-acre estate in Brittany that's being given to us to use, where we can have a private setting, and it's going to be a very interesting 3 nights, I believe. But I think that people have to understand that they have to take the matters into their own hand while advocating to have their governments change. I don't think it's an either-or question.
Right.
The same thing with the energy issue. We started something called the RIR-Project.org,
yes,
which is a nonprofit to raise awareness and also to raise funds to create a laboratory so that the scientists that we've identified can work on these very advanced energy systems, and we can bring them out independent of the government. We have the ability to do it. Recently, we were given a CD, an intelligence file from a source I don't want to name, that has over 2,000 pages of very important documents on it. That an intelligence operative had put together for us, that if we could put the scientific team together with some funding, and the funding we need is not a huge amount, but it's depending on how long of a project, $3 to $5 million US. We don't have the money to do it at this point, but we're hoping that someone who understands the physics behind these systems will say, look, this is where the real solution to the energy crisis and the environment is going to come from. It isn't going to be solar panels and windmills. Because, for example, for my home to be turned into a solar house is a $250,000 US
investment.
Change, and that's just simply untenable to most American homeowners. So, in order for, and not to mention your car, I mean, you know, and then people say, well, electric cars, but the electric cars are plugged into a grid, and in America, it's 55% coal-fired. Power plants. In China, it's almost 100% coal-fired. So you're really going backwards with electric cars if you're plugging them into a grid that's being run by coal. They've done studies. You're better off with a hybrid. So to get out of this situation, we have got to bring out these advanced physics and electromagnetic technologies. And so the RIR-Project.org is trying to identify people, and we're just about to finish a very professional grant proposal in the next couple of weeks that we'll make available to people who think they can help raise these funds for us. But, you know, ultimately, you know, people say, well, why can't you just, you know, have someone do this in their garage? And it's unfortunately a little more complex than that, and you're not going to be able to do this very easily. There are rumors that people have had such devices, but so far we have not found anyone that has anything that's legitimate, and the ones who have all had them either confiscated or they've been intimidated. There are a couple scientists we know who have built these things on their own in their own labs, but they've been very, frankly, roughed up and threatened. And so they don't want to do this by themselves. Part of it is that we have got to create a secure place where these scientists can work together, properly supported and protected, with the public involved. And that's what we're trying to do with the RIR-Project.org. And, you know, I think that ultimately that's something people can do. I mean, you know, people say, gee, what can I do? I said, well, you know, we're not talking, you know, one study that was done in in San Francisco, the city of San Francisco gave someone $5 million to just study the feasibility of getting the energy from the waves going in and out the Golden Gate. Now, that was just to do a study, not to build anything. For that